You are listening to Able Radio, simplifying productivity for small business owners everywhere. If you are looking for 1% improvements that add up to big results, this is the place for you. Every week, we learn about simple systems and tools that will help you build the business and life you've always wanted. Now here's your host, Zachary Sexton.
Welcome to Able Business Radio. My name is Zachary Sexton, and today I have with me Tiago Forte. Welcome, Tiago.
Thank you so much, Zachary. It's a real pleasure to be here.
It is a real pleasure to have you on. I've been reading your wonderful articles for quite some time. You're somebody in the productivity space that I look up to. You don't repeat some of the things that you hear in the echo chamber. You've got unique ideas, unique takes that come from all the coaching that you've done, all of the personal work that you've done, all the reading that you've done, and a synthesis of all that. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about, is your system for taking the information that you get in your world and synthesizing it and making connections and really making it useful, valuable information with a second brain, an external resource for you to look back on and use effectively. And I'm really excited about that. The one thing that I help people with, and the one thing that I try to teach and talk about the most, is when it comes to actions and managing all the would, could, should, ought to's out there. But I don't have as much material on resource management or idea management that you can, like if you read a great book and there's 5 or 6 takeaways that you really want to remember, where do you hold those? That's a very important part of productivity in the information age. So I'm really excited that you're coming on to share all that with us.
Yes, yeah, me too. One thing I really like about your podcast is that you embrace the small business kind of framing, because in my writing and everything I do, I'm a huge proponent of freelancing. And even if it's not a full-time job, people having side projects, extra income streams, online businesses, all these things. And it's funny, something I've noticed where the whole tech startup scene is very loud and very influential. And so people start, say, a freelancing business or an online business looking to the tech startup scene for inspiration, but that is almost always the completely wrong place to look. Tech startups are a very, very weird, bizarre animal. And really the model that most people should be using is small businesses. That's a much more helpful and realistic framing.
Well, thank you. And you would know, you're in the Silicon Valley area, so you actually probably worked with some tech startups. And how about I let you give a little bit of your background and overview and how you got into the productivity space with what you're doing, because you do have so much experience.
Yeah, so I kind of see myself, I do live here in what we call Greater Silicon Valley, which is now not just the Santa Clara Valley, but kind of the Bay Area. And I kind of see myself as like a productivity anthropologist. And the reason I say that is I live here amongst the jungle of the tech startup scene. I have clients that are tech companies. I do corporate trainings at tech companies and other large companies around here. Many of my clients are from that world. Many of my friends, just people around here that I've met and I hang out with are in that world. But my mission is kind of to learn about the innovation that's happening there, because it really is a tremendously innovative industry. And then to translate what I'm seeing there, the most interesting and the best ideas, to sort of everyone else. And that came from, I first came to San Francisco to work for an international consulting firm called Faber-Novell. And what that firm, they build themselves as an innovation consulting firm. And essentially what they're doing is they have an office here in Silicon Valley. They're getting the innovative practices of startups and translating them to large companies. Right? That's their business model. It's like, here is how small startups are working. Let's see if we can repackage those and sell them to really large companies. And I loved that idea of kind of translation and translating between cultures, largely because I'm a third culture kid. Both of my parents are immigrants from different countries. And so it appealed to me quite a lot. Except I didn't want to translate those ideas for large companies. I wanted to do it for individuals.
Perfect. And have them take advantage of all the tools and systems and mindsets that those geeky techs get to work on first. I've been a part of some teams that have done some more of the tech startup type methodologies, one of them being Agile and Scrum. And right now I'm diving a little bit more into Kanban, and I'll put some links to some definitions and resources where people can find out a little bit more about that. But in my opinion, great tools, but sometimes they go a little bit overboard and can be simplified a little bit. And that's what I'm looking at doing a lot more with my businesses, is taking those methods from tech world as well as from the manufacturing world, which you've done very well. There's this 11-part series I just got done reading on your site about the theory of constraints, which is amazing. That's another link for the show notes. But we're here to talk about one of those tech startup companies, and it's a larger one. It's one of the probably the unicorns that made it out. It's a note-taking application called Evernote. Can you tell us a little bit about Evernote, and then we can dive into how you really get the most out of it?
Sure. Yeah, so starting from the very beginning, Evernote is, as far as I know, the world's most popular note-taking app, digital note-taking app. Probably not as used as, say, something like Google Docs, but Google Docs is kind of it's more like word processing, document creation. Evernote is part of, there's a group of companies that do this where it's like, basically, it's like a sketchbook, or a small notebook you carry with you. It's not to produce some very nice, refined, beautiful PDF document that you're going to send to a client. It's for your own purposes. And in that respect, it's interesting. It's one of the more personal apps that people use. It's your own thinking, your own ideas, your own brainstorms, your musings, your journal entries, your work in progress, like all the messiness that you don't necessarily show the world, you can keep in an app like this. And I'd say if I had to point out one feature that makes it different than other, say, like a word processing program, is that it's not based on, it's kind of like the content is surfaced at the very top level, right? So in something, anything from Microsoft Word to Google Docs to Dropbox to Box, there's a thing called a folder or a file that you have to open, and then you get to see the content, right? And then once you have that open, you're usually, for the most part, looking at one thing at a time, one document at a time. With Evernote and other digital note-taking apps, everything is right at the surface. So you go in, and as soon as you just select a note, you have the content right there. There's no double clicking, there's no opening, there's no loading, there's no saving, right? And what that does is it's almost like when you're brainstorming on a whiteboard or you're making a sketch, you want everything right at your fingertips. Right? You don't have to be reaching into one folder and then coming out and then reaching somewhere else and coming out. It's all right there. And you can start to see really serendipitous connections and relationships between things that would not be apparent if they were stuck inside files.
I like that you mentioned that, because you seem to always put words to things that I think, but I can't quite describe. Right now at my business, I've got about 20, 25 documents on certain processes, how we do things in the business. A lot of them actually have to do with the podcast, certain editing and post and whatnot. And then a lot of them are internal ones. And I built them on Google Docs because my virtual assistant and I both have Gmail, and it's already in there, and it's got a wiki type structure so we can link from one document to the next. But as far as updating it and revising, I don't think I do it as often because it's not at my fingertips right there. So I might need to buy her an Evernote account so I can have it be a little bit easier to maintain on my end. And that definitely is one of the features of Evernote that's very nice. And just to give a sense of how I use it, and then we can dive into how I could probably be using it better. My main thing is my journal. So every day I journal there. I have a little text expander snippet, and I'll link to the episode where I interview about text expander, which is a great application where you can have a keyboard shortcut that expands out a date or some information in that text expander. And I have a little outline for my journal depending on what I was focused on, what went well, what didn't go well. So I use that. I then also have a place where I put all of my receipts. And Stacy Harmon, who I think took one of your courses,
She was, yeah. She helped me develop the course. She took the course, and her new course, which is completely most comprehensive end-to-end course on how to be an Evernote power user. Because my course doesn't really go into how to use Evernote. I sort of assume that you kind of already know how, and I build on top of that. But I refer to people to her course all the time because it's the complete deal.
Absolutely, absolutely. I also refer people to her course. Episode 8, we get into the settings, but it's audio. We try our best to walk you through the various settings that really help me out, having the notebooks in the sidebar and how to just make everything a little bit easier. So if you go to zacharysexton.com/8, you can get the podcast, but actually what might even be more helpful are the show notes where I do some screenshots on how that's done. And you can get the basics of Evernote, which we're not going to necessarily talk about in this show, but there's three things. There's a note, notebooks, then there's stacks. So a stack is a stack of notebooks, and then notebooks are filled with notes. So that's the general idea, but everything's, like Tiago said, is on the surface and easy to go and write with. And the reason why I wanted to say how I use Evernote, so I've got receipts, I've got journal, might be doing my process in there, but right now at the moment I'm not, is because I use it as more of a tool for storing things that I want to remember. But the way you go about using Evernote is a little different. You use it more as a thinking tool, and you have some steps on how you use it as a thinking tool. So I'm wondering if we can start getting in there.
Sure. Okay. So this is my obsession.
Well, I'm glad to dive into it with you.
Yeah. Let's see. First of all, I think your listeners should understand one thing, which is a lot of people don't like Evernote. I get a lot of backlash. It's not designed the way they want. It doesn't have the features they want. It doesn't look the way they want. And one thing, it's funny because I'm like in every other area, I try to be contrarian and try to use like the cool thing, like the different thing. In this category, I go just use Evernote. Just use the default, right? And the reason for that is there's a couple of reasons. First of all, Evernote is just the database, right? The power of having a company that's been around so long and has so many millions of users is that it's a platform. And there are countless integrations with Evernote, right? So whatever you like to use, one day for your diary or journal entries, those can connect and save to Evernote. You like to use a sketchnoting app to make drawings, those can save to Evernote. You like to make mind maps, all the main mind mapping apps save to Evernote. Right, so it's like whatever interface you want to use on top of that is completely fine to create something. When it comes time to save it, you want the very basic infrastructural features, right? You want really robust backups. You want really strong syncing. You want an app is going to be there in a few years from now, not some like new startup that just came up. Right? And sometimes, a new, note-taking app will come up and I'll use it and I'll be like, wow, this is so beautifully designed. It's so new and cool. But then I get to a point where there's some very, very key back-end functionality that's missing, right? Like it doesn't do sharing was one recently. I was like, well, okay, this is beautiful, but it's completely pointless to use this without sharing. So then I just came back to Evernote. So that's the main thing is Evernote is just one piece. It's the database. It's the foundation on which you build everything.
Why put your database in there as opposed to Dropbox or just right on your hard drive?
So great question, and we talk about this. And actually, the course that I teach, it's kind of Evernote is front and center, but it's really about all your files. I teach you this organizing system that I've talked about in the past called PARA, which stands for Projects, Areas, Resources, and Archives. And that system is not specific to any tool. So what the implementation I have people walk through in the course is to set up these 4 categories, PARA, on Evernote or whatever digital note-taking app they're using, on Dropbox or Box or whatever cloud storage they're using, on their computer operating system, on Google Drive or whatever other word processing they're using. Basically, it's by using a level of abstraction that's above any app, you get to use a system every single place that you have files. And the beauty of that is this cognitive burden of switching from tool to tool that we have, right? Like it's a real issue. You're in your email and you have, things are chronological. You jump to Dropbox and things are by project. You jump over to Evernote, things are by kind of area of responsibility. That involves a cognitive burden, right? Switching from one organizing scheme to another, to another, to another. And that has a price. right? There's a price in it takes up some of our bandwidth to do that. So what I'm trying to do is abstract the organizing layer one level up, so then you can use the exact same categories across every single tool.
I did not. I wanted to ask you about Para, and I didn't realize you thought of it as a complete organizational structure. And I'm really liking this. And uh, what I'm thinking is folders, right? For Drive, I would have a top level folder for all my projects, all my events, all my resources, and all my archives. And for my hard drive, although I try to keep everything backed up on Google Drives, which is kind of like Dropbox, I could do the same. And for Evernote, would that be the stacks or the folders that you keep everything in your projects, events, resources, or archives?
So this actually speaks to an interesting, almost philosophical idea. And organizing theories of organizing are fascinating because to come up with a theory of organizing or to commit to one, you have to make decisions about what it's for.
Hmm.
Like what kinds of actions, what kinds of thinking, what kinds of behavior are you seeking to promote, right? So I'll give you an example. The classic way of organizing Evernote that many people use is the top level is areas, right? So they'll have a stack that's like the business, and then inside that stack are notebooks for the different parts of their business, right? Then they'll have another stack that's health, and then inside health they'll have the different projects related to health, right? So basically you can think of like the surface of the water as areas, and only underneath the water are the projects, right? And I'm essentially saying that that's wrong. That's wrong for modern knowledge workers because what does it do is it hides the most actionable, important things, which is the projects, underneath the surface,
Mm.
right? The thing when I load up my organizing tool, let's say Evernote, what am I there to do? I'm there to get as fast and as accurate an idea of the current status of my projects, right? That's the thing I'm most often doing. Sometimes I'm doing other things, but that's the most common. If that's the case, it doesn't make sense to bury those projects underneath a layer. It actually makes sense to pull out those projects into their own completely dedicated stack. Okay? Because then what can I do? I can collapse all the other stacks that are not as actionable and focus 100% of my attention only on the project stack.
I am redoing my Evernote as soon as we get done with this call. Yeah, because I'm looking at all my stacks, and yeah, I've got books, I've got passive income, I've got a health stack. So yeah, I use a speaking one, um, habits and rituals, and in there's totally actionable stuff, and there's totally just reference and review stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
It's mixed in,
that's
right?
that's yeah. So keeping that projects on top, what would you put in your events? Because when I think events, I think calendar.
So the second one is areas of responsibility. Projects, areas, resources, archives.
Oh, areas. Oh yeah, para. My notes were wrong from the other day because events does not start with an A. What is areas then? So we've got your projects, and you put how many? Just actually a little bit of a personal question. If it's just off the top of your head, how many projects do you think you have going in that section with Evernote?
Probably, so I'm using the GTD, the getting things done definition of projects and areas actually. I'd say the average is between 15 and 25 projects.
15 and 25 projects. And can you give me an example of a project? Maybe
Yeah,
a
my
big one and a
course.
small one. What's that? Your course would be a big
A
project.
big one, the biggest one probably right now would be the course, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a project because it has an ending, right? If it was like, see, this is where the distinctions get very interesting and seemingly inconsequential, but I believe actually extremely consequential because, well, we'll get into that in a second. But basically, a big one would be my course. A small one would be like a weekend trip that I'm taking this weekend.
Okay. Okay. So that's a good definition that I didn't even ask you, but I'm glad you answered. Is projects have an end date, so
Hmm.
it's something that's actionable. Something's not right in the world, and you want to change it with actions, and they have an end date. When you have a project, how do you create that note? Is it like the end result is the name of the note, and then action steps with checklists? What do they typically look like for you?
So when people first start doing this, and I have a whole kind of implementation process, I ask them to be more descriptive in the project titles, like usually to start with a verb, to say the action that when that action or when that thing happens in the world, the project will be finished. But what I found is that over time, once I get kind of in the habit, I'm very comfortable with very clearly and quickly identifying projects. I like to use code names. That's
Ooh,
just
what's a
some
code name?
that's just something personal. It's usually like an acronym or like some kind of like dramatic sounding word. Like let me think. I mean, actually, it's not usually that interesting. It's usually just like, yeah, the if it's like a multi-part thing, like I'm in this program now, so the self-expression and leadership program will just be
Uh-huh.
SELP, and that's just because I can very in an instant, it's just faster. In an instant, I can
Yeah.
see that word, and then especially since I'm replicating this across every single tool, right? It kind of saves some time to be more succinct.
Oh, okay, I see. Whenever I have a project with the podcast, it's always ABR, Able Business Radio. That makes
Yeah,
sense. That makes sense.
yeah,
So condensing it a little bit more.
yeah.
Okay. So maybe a shortcut, but originally you want the note to have um, start with maybe an action verb and the definition of done, what result you want to get with it. What does the content of the note look like?
So these are actually notebooks, right? The stack itself is projects, the name
Mm.
of the stack, and then within the stack is individual one notebook for each project.
Okay. Okay. So you're naming. Thank you. So you're naming the notebook, the actionable item with an end result, and then the notes. What do the notes look like?
Yeah, so I think the why this might be weird is one of my big things is I try to convince people on my soapbox to define projects much, much, much smaller than they're used to. And this has many, you read about it in my series on the theory of constraints, probably. It's related to this idea of small batch sizes,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you have 3 or 4 massive projects, those tend to be very rigid, slow moving, right? It's like if you can only make progress on a project when you have 4 hours, you're only going to make progress when you have 4 hours. How many times in a week do you have a 4 hour block? Like once, maybe?
Yeah, not often.
On the other hand, if your projects are tiny and you can make progress in 30 minutes or an hour, you're going to move forward in smaller chunks, but on a much more consistent basis. And this is really hard to
What do
do
you call
because
those small chunks? I love the word.
I know this language I'm actually working with because what I've started to realize is the word project has so much cultural baggage, you know? Like a project is something, we go to
It
work.
seems so official
It's
and
so
big and
official.
hard and
Yeah, it's so
time
heavy. It's
consuming.
like
Yeah.
project. Ugh. And
Uh,
like project management, project planning is like for most people at least like boring and like we're talking about like getting stuff done and having fun and really creating value and we have this word project. So that's part of the issue. I don't have a substitute yet. I've used the word intermediate packet, but that's actually different.
oh, okay. That was the one I was thinking of, like intermediate, small little packets of value.
Yeah, yeah. Intermediate packet is even smaller than my small projects.
Oh, okay, okay. Then we'll
Uh,
we'll we'll both sleep on it, come up with a better name for project, make up our own.
yeah,
Um,
I think
okay, so
the
you
important
you're
distinction. Yeah, go ahead.
oh that was just trying to get back to where we're at is the projects are smaller than most people think. Um, like your biggest one would be the course, but a small one would be a weekend trip. Um, so the notes, what are these notes looking like?
So that's a great question because my whole approach, I um I differentiate from so the two normal ways of organizing something like Evernote are notebook first or tag first, right? So some people are very notebook centric, right? Like every note goes in a notebook and the notebooks have a structure. Like actually my approach starts out pretty notebook centric, right? Um, the other way is tag first. So you kind of don't really worry. Some people don't even have notebooks. They just dump everything, say, in the inbox. And they don't worry about putting it in different notebooks. Tag first is kind of like relying on tags, depending on tags to find things wherever they happen to be located in the program. And I'm sort of saying that both of those have their uses, but that your primary approach should be note first. Like the most kind of salient feature of your organizing system should be making the sort of the basic unit or the most important unit of your note taking notes, which sounds kind of obvious, but you'd be surprised. Like people, there's this funny thing, I think it's related to this idea that has sort of become trendy that ideas don't matter. Like, have you
Yeah,
heard this?
execution is king, ideas are
Yes.
pawns.
I think I blame Silicon Valley for this. It's like, yeah, ideas are cheap, execution is what matters, or this kind of thing, which is kind of this like intellectual machismo or something. But I'm like, to me, ideas matter a heck of a lot. And one note may not seem like it's that important. A single note, it might just have like some of my notes have like one sentence, right? They're just like one little thought, one little snippet. To me, it's worth putting in attention into the design of individual notes, right? Because once all your notes stand on their own, right? It doesn't matter what tags they have, it doesn't matter what notebooks they are. You can mix and match them in whatever order, right? They become like Lego blocks, right? Like a Lego block is a thing. It has its own structure, has its own value. And once each little piece has its own value, you can kind of put them together into any number of different structures. And so now there's a caveat here, right? Because this probably sounds like a lot of work. I'm individually designing my notes. I have like 10,000 notes. But here is where my opposition to tagging comes in. Okay. The problem with tagging is not that tags are bad. It's that with tagging, you're evenly spreading your attention out across pretty much all your notes, right? Let's say I depend heavily on tagging, every single note that comes in, I have to tag. And preferably I have to tag multiple times with multiple tags, right? To me, that doesn't make sense because if you look at any collection of notes, most of the value is in a very small percentage of them.
Hmm.
This is what people miss, okay? If you were, your Evernote collection was a house and it was on fire and you had to run out, what are the, say, 5% of notes that you would take into your arms, the equivalent of your passport, your birth certificate, and like your tax records that you would run out of the house with? Those are your most valuable notes, and probably almost all of the value that you have in your notes is in those. So I say focus almost all of your design attention on that 5%. Don't spread out your attention liberally among all of the different notes.
All right. And this comes into probably your idea of progressive summarization. So we'll come back to the organization bit. This is a little bit in your capture bit, but I feel like it's time to talk about progressive summarization since you're getting in that way. This is how you overcome tags, which is something we didn't really talk about on the top of the show, but you're similar with Stacy Harmon in the sense that she's not a big fan of tags either. She thinks it's a lot of upfront work for not much long-term benefit,
Hmm.
especially since Evernote is so searchable. And she's proven
Hmm.
me wrong time and time again. I'm like, I just searched for it and I didn't find it. And she's like, well, term wasn't in there. And next time I go and search for that note, I put what I searched for in that note as my own tagging system. So rather than
Hmm.
creating an exact tag, just write what future you is going to likely search for, and that's a great way to retrieve a note into the future without tags, or just like make up your own tags. So I was always searching for the dimensions on exporting YouTube videos. That's my
Hmm.
80/20 note. That's one of the ones I'd pull out of the burning building because for some reason I cannot memorize those dimensions. So I search it every single time.
Yeah,
And I just, anything that I've ever searched it as is in that note written there. So I just find it really quickly. It doesn't matter
totally.
how I'm thinking about it. It's like, oh, YouTube. Oh, yeah. Whiteboard productivity. Oh, yeah. Dimensions. Yeah. Oh, well, me spelling dimensions wrong. Okay, cool. So,
Yeah.
but you've got this idea that allows people to spend a little bit more time and attention on those important notes through that's called progressive summarization. Can you summarize progressive summarization for us?
Yes, happy to. So here's it's really a perfect segue. Um, so you have your 5% of notes that's most valuable, right? First of all, how do you know what 5% those are? like in your example, it's pretty straightforward, right? Like if you have, some, I don't know, business information, let's say your passwords for stuff like your, medical records or some, like if it's just straightforward factual information, it's easy to know what that is. But with creative notes, it's not as easy, right? What are your 5% most valuable, useful ideas? I don't think most people can just say off the top of their head, right? So there's two ways to identify those, okay, or even to do this kind of design of individual notes that I'm saying. You could do it up front. So let me give an analogy to a workbench. Okay, so in your garage you have a workbench where you have all your tools. Okay, there's two ways to organize this workbench. You could do it up front, which is you could just theorize or hypothesize, okay, what is the logical place for everything to go? Right, where should the hammer go? Up here, the measuring tape, the saw, the nail gun, the nails, right? There's kind of a logic to how things are related and also to where they fit and also to how often you use them, right? Things you use more often are kind of closer to where your hands are. That makes sense with something like a workbench. With something like creative research, it doesn't work because everything is arbitrary and everything is abstract, right? There's no physical constraints for you to depend on, right? So like I said, what are your most useful ideas? What are the ones you access the most? Where do they fit? How are they interrelated? Those are all very difficult questions to answer kind of upfront. So what I'm saying is don't even try. Don't even try to answer them up front. Do it the way that ants do it, which is opportunistically. So I'm really mixing metaphors here, but go with me. If you look at a hive of ants, right? Ants have the same problem where they have this environment that is extremely uncertain, extremely chaotic. Okay? They have another problem, which is they're very, very stupid. Right? An individual ant, even like the queen ant, is dumb. Like they have no working memory, they have no analytical skills, they have no planning skills, nothing. So how do ants cooperate? How do they carry out, let's say projects? What they do essentially is they wander. They just wander around their environment. When an ant finds food, they go, oh, food. The one thing they can remember apparently is how to get home, how to get back to where they started, right? And so they get the food and they walk home carrying that food in their mouth. And after having found the food, they leave a different trail of pheromones, right? So as they're walking back from this food source to the home, they leave a little trail of pheromones. And what that pheromone tells other ants is, if you follow this trail, you'll find food, right? So it's opportunistic. Right? They just wander around, they find food, they bring it back to the nest, and then all the other ants, as they come across that trail, they also go and find the food and eventually bring all the food home. Right? It's completely opportunistic. It's relying on randomness and serendipity and coincidence and chance to find opportunities. Right? And so I say the way that you identify this 5% of notes that you should focus your attention on is, first of all, by wandering, which is a great analogy to what the creative process is like, right? It can't be done like bam, 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 A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. You got to kind of wander and explore. And then so the way that you identify these 5% of notes is every time you access that note, every time you touch a note, improve the note a little bit, make it slightly more discoverable, right? So a note that you access 10 times, you'll have touched it 10 times. That means you'll have improved it and made it discoverable 10 times. So it's sort of like you can imagine like a peak. There was like a valley of notes that were all the same. That note starts to become like a peak, starts to emerge from the soup of notes, which then in the future makes it even easier to discover.
How does improving the note make it more discoverable?
Yeah, great. You're very good at these segues. So think about summarization. When you have a text and you summarize it, what are you doing? You're increasing the signal to noise ratio, right? You're getting what you think is the most relevant, most important point, and you're kind of you're emphasizing it. You're making it more visible, right? Now that's great, and everyone does this, right? We summarize books, we summarize podcasts, we summarize blog posts. Summarization is something that's very natural to us. What I'm saying with progressive, and the reason it's progressive summarization, is that can be done multiple times. It can be done in multiple layers, okay? So imagine this. You have notes on a book. It's like 5 pages, you know. If it's a good book, the notes themselves could easily be 5, 10, 20 pages. Summarize the best parts of those. For example, by bolding. Go through and for every paragraph, bold the 2 or 3 words or terms or ideas or sentences that are most interesting, right? Those sentences then become more discoverable for your future self. But don't stop there, right? Because then among the bolded parts, which at this point, let's say altogether are about a page long, you could find the most important and relevant parts of those. So you could say highlight those in yellow, right? Now it's down to like a quarter of a page. Do it again. Even in that quarter page, you can summarize what is the main core idea in that, you know, tiny amount of text. And if you do this in 4, 5, 6 layers, corresponding to how important or relevant the note is, eventually it will be so discoverable that with one glance, right, with one glance at say this 5th or 6th level of summarization, you can get the gist of an entire book in one instant. Okay, and you might think, well, that's a lot of work for that much value, right? But now here's the interesting thing is, what you have available with these layers is, let's say you glance at a note, you see that top layer and you go, this book is relevant to my interests, right? Or not to my interest, but to my problem. Like you're working on a project right now and you need material, you need supporting research, you need kind of something to work with. After getting that gist and deciding, yes, this is relevant, you don't have to then go back and read the entire book. You don't even have to go back and read your full 10-page notes on the book. You can just go only to the next level of summarization. You can go to the highlighted parts, the yellow, which is still only a quarter of a page. If it's still relevant and still worth your time, you can then go to the bolded parts. If it's still worth your time and you really want to get all the fine-grained details, you can go back and read the entire notes. So basically you're scaling. There's a gradient of action. Instead of going, you know, one sentence summary over here all the way to read the full book, you have all these little intermediate steps where you can scale and calibrate the amount of attention that you pay according to how relevant this source is to your project.
Wow. These show notes are going to be long. I'll have to put a link into it. James Clear recently came out with 52 books in 3 sentences. And I was so jealous. I was like, oh, man, I wish I'd done that with all the books that I've read over the last few years, because I've read a lot and like you're describing, have the mass of text that comes from the notes, but I couldn't think of a way to really distill it without just rereading the book or sitting there and thinking really hard about it. But it seems like a very cognitively easy way to find the core of a particular novel or book geared at whatever it is, and be able to keep that with you. So those small, maybe this is where you want to use the term packets of data. It's almost like a compressed photo. To use a third analogy, you can have a huge, very refined photo with lots of megabytes worth of data, or you can just kind of get a thumbnail. And it seems like you're able to pull the thumbnail of information that is good enough to use and to get value out of, unless you want more detail or need more detail. Cool. So how do we come back in to the overall system? Because that's what I want to pull out. And obviously we don't have enough time to do everything, and that's why you've created a course, which we'll talk about and make sure we have links to. And when this comes out, I haven't got the exact date, but you'll likely only have a week or two to decide if you want to enroll, because it is a live course that people go through in a cohort, which I really like, because that's that extra accountability that would be helpful. And then there's people to interact with. Because there is a timeline to it, you'll actually do it, because I feel like it's very easy to buy a course and maybe just let it sit there because there's no immediate due date. So it's really cool how you created your course that way. But just to be able to have a snapshot of the organization system that you call your second brain that you're gonna teach, I want to go back to the organization piece, the para piece, so the projects, the areas, the resources, and the archives. Projects we already defined, especially if you're using Evernote as a stack that will have the action and the definition of done. And then within the projects, you'll have notebooks that will define things further, and then you have notes. Can you, if you have maybe 90 seconds, describe how you teach people to create and use those and what they look like?
You mean like the implementation?
Sure.
we talk a lot about this distinction between actionable information and non-actionable, right? Actionable is like tasks, projects, what's happening. And then there's non-actionable, which is sort of background research, supporting materials, reference information. And the reason I'm like so dedicated right now to figuring out how to do non-actionable information, reference information, is to me, it's a big problem. It's much more voluminous than actionable. It's huge, right? Actionable, you can constrain it and say, here's need to know. Non-actionable reference is potentially unlimited. It's not clear where you should focus your attention. It's not clear how to use it. It's not clear how to retrieve it. All these things that are unclear. The other thing with something like this is it's never finished, right? Unlike, say, a to-do list or a project list actually is going to get done, you're never done with your open-ended creative research, right? That's something you're going to do until the day you die. And that's stressful to some people that there's no finish line, but it can also be empowering, because if there's no finish line, it means you never have to worry about what done looks like. There's no point to get to. There's no end goal. And so the way I have them implement Para is to put everything in archives, right? Have archives be, which is the least, you'll notice the categories are by actionability. Projects are most actionable, areas are less actionable, resources are less actionable, and archives are least actionable. And the reason for that is you can put all your files in archives. And in my course, I have them put everything, every Word document, every picture, every little text edit document with a phone number from a guy they met one time, like even their physical notebook. Take photos of your notebook, like do a mind dump and put everything in one container, which is archives. Then, opportunistically, this is kind of the theme, move things up the scale of actionability only as needed. Right? Instead of saying, oh, here's a massive folder of files. Yeah, those are actionable. I'm going to put those in projects. No, don't do that work up front. Only individual files, when you find that you need them, move them one at a time into projects. And the reason for that is, in general, you want to keep the project, the more actionable stacks, like project and resources, as small as possible. Right? As soon as they explode in volume, like you said, things get mixed in and it's kind of hard to see what's there. So anything you can do to keep them down and small is a good thing.
All right, that was worth the 45 minutes we've talked right there. That is so helpful. Well, everything has been worth the time, is my hope, and at least what I've been getting out of that. But right there, a lot of times when people have a tool like Evernote or even just their hard drive or messy Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever it is, they feel like it's this big, onerous project. Like, I got to get that organized. Man, do I need to get that? It's sort of like the garage or your kitchen or that closet that you don't go into. It's like, boy, do I really need to get that organized. But the nice thing about digital is you could just stuff it one place, and it's actually not taking up any space. It's probably taking up less cognitive space because it's out of your way. And then still use the search function or just your memory if it's not in Evernote to like, oh yeah, I had those notes on that one thing. I need to bring that up there. Oh, this would be helpful for me right now. I'm going to bring it up there. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like just in time.
Yeah.
It's like just in time organization. So you're not doing the work ahead of time. You're not trying to front load everything and make decisions before you actually know the answer. It's you're waiting for it. Oh my gosh, Tiago, blew my mind. Okay, so you throw everything in archive. Is that an archive stack?
Yes, and it's huge, it's messy, it's chaotic, but it doesn't matter because 99% of the time it's collapsed. I don't even see it.
And then pull things that are actionable into projects. What do those project notebooks and notes look like for you?
They're pretty messy. Like everyone I show my Evernote to, they're like shocked that it's like messy. Right? I don't really put much effort into tagging. I don't have any convention for titles. I don't have tables of contents. In fact, I try to minimize internal structure because it's like internal structure now, what I think is adding structure, actually has the potential of limiting my future thinking, right? Because I assume that my future self is smarter than my current self. So I don't want to tie the hands of my future self. I don't want to give them legacy, just structure for the sake of structure. I want to give them the raw material. Here's the raw information, because I can't even imagine what you, future self, are going to be able to do, the potential that you're going to have to turn this into things I can't even imagine.
It's very optimistic of you.
All right.
Okay. So projects are actionable. What's areas? What's that one mean?
Areas are just, it's the GTD definition, which is just ongoing areas of concern for your life. right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're very different from projects in that they don't end, or at least the ending is indefinite. A great example is relationships. A relationship is something that you're responsible for, that you probably want to keep information about. I have notes for relationships, uh, birthday presents that I want to get this person, important dates in this person's life, this person's address, like all sorts of information. And yet there's no ending. There's no like, oh, I achieved this relationship. I achieved the outcome of this relationship. No, the goal of the relationship is to keep going, right? And that's the case with a lot of things: finances, health, my apartment, my car, hobbies, sports, my own personal productivity, for example. That's a funny thing. That's not a project. I'm never going to finish my own personal productivity, right? I'll finish individual projects, but the underlying ongoing thing, which is productivity, never ends, right? And that means it's not a finish line, it's a standard. It's a standard that I draw in the sand and I say, my performance will fluctuate. Sometimes I'll do better, sometimes I'll do worse. But what I'm committed to is that it always at least meet this minimum standard forever, right? So those are areas.
Are all areas forever areas? So let's say you want to do Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and that's be something that would be like a never-ending project. You could always get better at it, especially if you're starting at a white belt and you're trying to get your triple black belt or however that works. And then you decide, I'm not into BJJ. I'm going to get rid of that. Would that then go back to the archives if you got done with it?
Exactly. So the definition of archives is simply any other category that's no longer active.
Hmm.
Right? And this can happen with resources too. Like you're interested in web design. You're like, oh yeah, I'm really going to get into web design. After a couple of years of it sitting there and gathering dust, you're like, I'm not going to learn web design. And so you don't want to, don't delete all those notes. You might come back to it eventually. Just get that notebook and stick it straight into archives.
Oh, so BJJ might be a better fit for resources. Is that
It could be.
what I'm hearing?
So there's all sorts of subtle distinctions. And this is where the definitions that I lay out for people are important. Is the difference between an area and a resource is your level of commitment, right? For you, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu might be an area because you've committed to a standard of performance, right? For me, it might just be a very minor interest, right? So the same notebook with the same title for you could be an area because you're committed to it. For me, it's just a resource.
Okay. And then other resources might include, it sounds like books. Are there other examples that you have for resources?
Yeah, they're just interests. I have, philosophy, psychology, theory of constraints, even more functional categories like stock photos, testimonials, media, quotes, anything that's like information that's not like something you're personally committed to, like a project or an area, but is useful to have around.
For me, that would be hard to decide if that resource was active or an archive. Do you have any rules of thumb for helping folks with that?
Yeah, it actually doesn't matter that much because the resources and archives are over here on the end of actionability.
Mm.
So they're sort of similar. I'd say the difference is just like, do you want something a little more at your fingertips? Like, is this something you're going to be accessing, or is it really an archive? Like, I have this mental picture of an archive as like this massive dark warehouse where it's there. You can like walk down the aisles and like have your flashlight and open the drawer and find something, right? But if I have a notebook that's on, let's say, the future of work, which is super relevant to me, that's definitely a resource for me because I'm going to be accessing it all the time.
Got it. Got it. That man, I could probably go on, but I think that's all we have time for today because I want to be respectful of yours. I'm starting to get a good sense of what your overall system is and why it might be valuable. But if you want to leave people with some places where they can find you online, and then we'll get to a book and a resource that you'd recommend as well.
My main website is fortelabs.co. And that's essentially a portal to everything else, my blog, my online courses. You can find out more information about me, my social media, my email newsletter, everything is there. If you want to find out more about the course, you can go to buildingasecondbrain.com. And that has everything you would ever want to know on the course. Also, there's a little place there to put your email address. If you put your email address in that little box and hit submit, it'll sign you up for my introductory email series. So basically from now, it started last week, but from now until the course begins, Every 2 days, I send out something. And in almost all cases, it's something that I've written or something I've recorded or something I've created that actually puts personal knowledge management and this whole digital note-taking thing into context, right? And I mean, there's enough content I send out in that email intro series to be a course unto itself. I kind of designed it to give people value and give people, kind of my thinking without even necessarily needing to sign up for the course. And if you end up reading those emails and you love what they're talking about, you can always sign up for the course itself.
Wonderful. I'm going to sign up right now for those. And it's just something that we were joking before about what we should actually call this. I call it the Kaizen moment because it's something that will, like productivity, might be one of your areas in your Evernote notebook, is something you can never stop improving. But two things that I like to ask everybody who comes on the show is, what's a book that's had a big impact on your life and why, and what's a tool or a resource you might recommend? And the example I usually give is Evernote, but you can put whatever you want, even if it happens to be Evernote.
I think a really influential book on me has been Finite and Infinite Games. I read this a few months ago, and looking at I did my highlighting on my Kindle and exported to Evernote and then put it through progressive summarization. And it was one of the hardest books to summarize I've ever read. And my notes were some of the most extensive. I usually try to save only the very best parts. This book was ridiculous. There were like just whole pages, highlighted. Kind of broke my system. Just because it frames this very basic distinction between finite games, which are games you play to win, which are projects basically, and infinite games, which are games that you play to keep playing, which there's a parallel there to areas, right? And it just was very helpful to me in thinking about what is the purpose of my life? What am I here to do? It's not to just rack up a bunch of achievements and a bunch of trophies, right? To just check things off a bunch of boxes. It's to have a life that is worth living and that is inherently satisfying and valuable because I'm human and because I am who I am, not because I've done X, Y, and Z. So I think it's very powerful for high achievers and people that are sort of, addicted to productivity to hear that message and to hear it not in a like prescriptive tone or a religious tone or any sort of a any sort of a judgmental framing, but as a completely logical and empowering framing.
Neat.
And the tool, actually, text expanders have been really cool for me. That you mentioned before, and for me, their real value is not speed. Yeah, you save a couple seconds every time you use one. That's nice. It's that it allows me to standardize things. So the main way that I use it is when I write a task in my task manager, which I use things. I try to start each task with a standardized word, right? Instead of just writing whatever comes to mind. And the reason for that is, let's say things I want to read. When I type on my keyboard /R and then space, it expands from that into read : and then I can type what the thing is to read. And the reason that's important is, if I have an hour in the evening and I want to read, I don't want to have to dive into my task manager and try to find all the different things I want to read, right? Because I'll write those tasks like check out, review, take a look at, see, like there's 20 different ways that I'll describe what is essentially read. By using a text expander, it sort of forces me to standardize on this word read. So then I can just do a quick search in my task manager, and across all my different projects, it will show me everything that I have to read.
Oh, that's smart. That's smart. It's kind of a self-tagging system. I'd never thought about using Text Expander in that way. I like the standardization of Text Expander, and I also like the continuous optimization it allows me to do. Because let's say I have an email. I have this one that I use a lot. It's semicolon NICE NO. So nice no. It's like, thank you for the opportunity, but I'm not interested. And every time I'm always like, oh, well, this might soften the blow a little bit, or, oh, missed a comma there, or, oh, maybe I can link them to this resource and have it be done automatically. So it's sort of taken on your progressive improvement thoughts, too, with Text Expander. And I believe it was episode 11. I'll have to make sure, put it in the show notes. I interviewed Craig who is the founder of Text Expander, and he was letting me know all the more advanced features of the subscription service if you have a small team. And I'll be honest, I was a little annoyed with Text Expander by going to a subscription service, and you could still buy the standalone if you're just a solo person, but he really sold me on the subscription and how it could be super powerful, especially if you have a team that needs support. So if you start getting to the point where you need some support help with your with what you're doing, I'd highly recommend giving it a listen and checking out the subscription service for Text Expander, because you can put all your best thinking and then have maybe an assistant help answer questions that are just common. And it's sort of like an email template that can be done anywhere. It can be done on Twitter or Facebook or inside your course, wherever you want to put it.
Makes so much sense. Yeah, I'm starting to work with a small team with this course. I have a course manager, a couple others, and that sounds like something we could really make use of.
All right, I'll send you the link. Tiago, it was awesome. I really, really loved getting to talk with you, and I know I said at the very top of the show, like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go get completely into all this organization stuff and revamp my system. But now I know I only have one step. Create some stacks and throw everything into archive and see what bubbles up. So that's nice. It's a lot lighter than any other sort of project I could have come up with organizing my resource and my knowledge management and everything like that. So thanks again.
Yeah, absolutely. Just do it one piece at a time. That's good advice for anything in life. It gives you more opportunities to just enjoy things and actually produce value, instead of spending time organizing, which is always of questionable value.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Able Business Radio. Zach wants to help more small business owners like you make 1% improvements that add up to big results. Was this show helpful? Pay it forward. Subscribing and writing a review in iTunes is one of the best ways to help more people find out about the show. Thanks again for tuning in. We hope to see you here next Wednesday, where we will continue to share 1% improvements that will help you become a more useful, less stressed business owner.